Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome back to the Lockdown LitFest, where we're delighted today to offer you up a fantastic debut novelist who you may know in another guise. Robert Webb is best known for his work as the Webb half of Mitchell Webb in the Sony award-winning That Mitchell Webb Sound and the Bafta award-winning That Mitchell Webb Look, and as a permanent man-boy Germany in the acclaimed Peep Show. In 2017, his call to arms memoir, How Not to Be a Boy, was a #1 Sunday Times bestseller. And in his other writing, he's been a columnist for the Daily Telegraph and the new Statesman. Come Again is his first novel, is published right now by Canongate. Robert Webb, a very warm welcome to the Lockdown LitFest studio. First of all, how are you? Are you well?
I'm extremely well, thank you. This happens to be a day off from my new job as primary school supply teacher, so I'm not being patronised by any 8-year-olds today, so that's, a respite.
Good to hear. Whereabouts in the world are you? We're trying to seduce people. You and I are in the same room, but of course, because of lockdown and social distancing, we're many miles away from each other.
The magic of video conferencing, yes. No, I'm in the room that I laughingly call my study at home in West Hampstead, which is not Hampstead and it is not Kilburn. Let's just tidy that up, because that's what people like to say about it. Is a place of its own making.
It has its own tube station.
It has its own tube station and 2 overground. It's a communications hub. So, yes, that's where I am.
Well, we're pleased you're safe and we're pleased you're well, and it's a delight to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Without further ado, can we talk about how awful it is for a debut novelist to be launching their fantastic first novel at such a time? Because, of course, your publicist and your publishers will have spent months figuring out launch parties, author readings, festivals, and so on, all of which have been scrubbed. How do you feel about all that? Are you absolutely devastated?
Well, I mean, on the one hand, let's keep some perspective. I mean, there are higher calls in our sympathy at the moment than slightly frustrated authors. But there again, yes, I mean, it's all about timing, isn't it? I like to... If I spend 2 years writing a book, what I really love is to launch it sort of into a brick wall of pandemic monomania, preferably when all the bookshops are closed. That's what I like. But, there we are. People can still buy it. And yes, there was a whole tour organised. There was 14 gigs, 14 cities. And it became clear, I think, by the end of February, by the middle of February, it was pretty clear that crisscrossing the country and cuddling up for 1,000+ selfies was not quite the ticket anymore. So yes, things like this, thank you for having me, thank you for doing it, are sort of here to try and make up the shortfall for book lovers who, for some perverted reason, like listening to authors banging on about their latest book. We've all done it. I've been through that phase myself.
You've been to literature festivals.
I have been to literature festivals, even when I wasn't in it.
That shows great commitment to the cause. Let's come to the book. It's entitled Come Again. It has 2 extraordinary characters in it that I just identified with right from the get-go. You've drawn them beautifully. But can you introduce us to, first of all, to how Kate Marsden came to you, who she is, what she represents?
That character was really the genesis of the story, really. It came a very long time ago. It was in 2012 when I was filming a scene from Peep Show, Channel 4 sitcom I'm in, and I was sitting in Jeremy's car waiting for the crew to re-rig the lights. And a very nice man called Nigel Cole, who just directed me in a film called The Wedding Video, was just putting out a call saying, has anyone got any ideas for my next film? Because I've done that. And I just remember unfocusing my eyes and looking out of the window, and Kate sort of came to me, and that was kind of the nub of the nub. Yeah, why not? The nub of the story, really. Middle-aged widow goes back in time, meets future dead husband when he's still an annoying teenager. That's it, really. We've got Kate. She's about my age, a bit younger, 45. She lost her husband, Luke, a few months ago. They met when they were kids. They met when they were in their first week at college at the University of York. But she's in terrible grief. She's not getting better. She's become a danger to herself. She's in real trouble. One day, she wakes up. She's 18 years old. She's in her college room. It's 1992. She remembers everything. this was the week that she met Luke for the first time. She knows how he died. In fact, she knows that he's already ill. She thinks she's there to save him. So she's going to try and do everything exactly the same, hence comedy, because you can't do everything exactly the same. No,
exactly. It put me in mind, and I know not the only person to mention this. You've had some stunningly good reviews. It put me in mind of sort of falling in that sort of camp of fiction in which are placed Audrey Niffenegger and The Time Traveller's Wife, because of the time-slip aspect to the narrative. But also David Nicholls' superb One Day. I'm not going to ask you, were they influences, but were you aware of those in the ether? Had you read them?
I'd read and loved One Day. In fact, well, sadly, I made the stupid mistake of announcing that I was reading One Day on social media one summer holiday, and then somebody replied and told me the ending. So I swiftly got out of the habit of doing that. But anyway, I loved One Day. I haven't read The Time Traveller's Wife. As far as I'm aware, it's not the wife that does any time traveling. So hopefully there's a bit of distance between me and that. But in terms of tone and approach, I think there's a reasonable overlap with David. I really like his stuff, and if you like David Nicholls, there's a good chance you'll like me. Although I didn't read, I was sent his excellent Sweet Sorrow, which I'm reading now, which I daren't read while I was still writing because I would accidentally nick stuff. But yeah, it was the idea sort of is not massively original that you go back and into your own past. I think it's a very, very common daydream that we all have from time to time. But I think the grief element is what makes it slightly different, or different enough to be allowed to be a book. But the reviews correctly picked up on the fact that it is a cross-genre thing. I mean, it's kind of doing all kinds of stuff. You know, sometimes I thought, oh, this is a quiet little book about love and memory and grief, and then I find that there's also a punch-up and a car chase. So what can I tell you? I'm writing to please myself, and within a sort of, you know, the limits of a story that has a proper structure and some balance and some suspense and some, you know, all the things that you want from a novel, as opposed to a memoir where nobody really cares about the structure because lives don't have structure.
Right. No, I'm delighted to hear you say it. I think you're doing a bit of disservice because it's beautifully crafted as well. I mean, your narrative skills are absolutely superb.
Thank you.
You mentioned grief. I lost my mum quite recently, 7 weeks ago. I know when you've written about when you lost your dad, and if this is over personal, then forgive me and I'll shut up. But how deep was that well on which you drew in order to write about grief? Because it crackles off the page and is really incredibly poignant.
Thank you. Well, it was certainly, it was more than my father died in 2013, but I lost my mum when I was young, when I was 17 years old. So it's that really that was the formative encounter with loss, and that certainly informs what Kate is going through when we join her. I think it's not a competition, but I think it's worse to, you know, I would dread losing a partner as opposed to losing a parent. So it's really tough. But what I certainly remember was that when you lose someone who you live with, it's particularly hard because you're constantly living in the past in that sense, because everywhere it's like their absence is like a presence that wherever you turn, they are there. It's the squeak of the sofa and the hum of the fridge and all of the familiar domestic things that they've touched and interacted with. And so when we join Kate, she is literally stuck in the past, and it's because of, you know, her experiences at school and her childhood and to some extent her parents that have made her this slightly isolated, set apart person. She's not the girl next door. She's got very unusual skills and unusual temperament, and because of that she's cut herself off from her friends, and that's why she's in trouble. She hasn't got to the second stage, which she does through the book. I mean, the whole book's about grief, but don't tell anyone. I don't want to put them off. But the arc of the story is she literally has to go and live in the past in order to remember what the present has to say for itself, in order to re-engage with the present. And that's the good bit that comes after grief. We call it mourning. It's where you integrate the lost past with the new present.
Yeah, that's beautifully put, actually. And I think you're a very good advocate for your own writing. I mean, she is a fascinating character because she's not easy to pin down. She's not a pigeonholable character. She's worked as an IT expert for a PR company. She's coming towards that fantastic, what's the word, compromat. She's got some fantastic compromat on an unsavory Russian client of the company. There's all sorts of stuff going on. Can you talk a little bit about how your relationship as the author with her, the character that you're writing, changed over the period of writing the book? Because I would imagine, I'm guessing this took probably a year or so to write at the very least. And of course, relationship with characters ebbs and flows across that time.
Yes, I mean, it's my relationship, as well as my relationship with Kate, it's my relationship with my own sort of the creative part of what I do, as opposed to the sort of left brain, right brain, the critic and the artist, if you like. If let's be Ponzi, if I could be this Ponzi just for a moment, I think it's allowed. I'm writing and I'm kind of going, okay, she's walking into a bookshop, and I've got this voice going, well, why is she walking into a bookshop? What's she going to do in a bookshop? And I'm kind of just let her walk into a bookshop, and we'll find out what's she going to? Well, I imagine she's going to read a book. What do you think? Anyway, that's just the noise in my head for 2 years. So in terms of my relationship with Kate, it's allowing the characters the space to do their thing. I realized that this was my first novel. I'm going to find out what kind of novelist I am. Am I a planner, or am I a pantser? Am I someone who flies by the seat of his or her pants whilst without any kind of plan? And I think at heart I'm a planner, and I wish I'd done a bit more planning, not because I think it would have been a better novel, but because I would have had a less stressful time. There would be less pacing around the garden going, I don't know what happens next, oh my God. And you just have to relax and calm down and just trust yourself to the characters to lead you where they're going to go. And sometimes you will get stuck. And at that point, I found that getting stuck or feeling blocked, the solution almost always was just to look back and find the last thing I wrote that I really like. Because quite often it'll just be you've gone down a path that you don't really, either you think you ought to do this bit, or we need this scene for some reason, or there ought to be I'm a proper novelist now, there ought to be a description of a meadow, and even though I can't remember the last time I saw a meadow, and not that exactly, but that kind of thing, and you realize, okay, I'm not enjoying myself, so these last 600 words have to go. And so it's just the willingness to take wrong turns, and to go back and take it up from the last time you were enjoying it as a reader, is a really important part of it for me. But maybe it'll be different next time.
I have this image in my head now of you channeling a 40s drunk, unwashed Kate, head to hand, going, what's my motivation for walking into a bookshop? What the hell am I doing?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was, yeah.
You talk us through a little bit, because you do Kate so well, and I say that's a terrible thing to say. I retract instantly, Mr. Webb. You do Kate so well. You write her so well. She's completely convincing, to me, a male reader, obviously. How difficult is it to step out of that and into the Luke character? Were you able to sort of, can you hold those two? I know that you perform. Can you talk us through the dynamic, for those that don't know, how you hold multiple characters in your head over such a long period of time?
It's sort of, it has a sort of parallel with acting, in that you're not, if you've got a line that a character is going to say, it's not so much how would this character say this line, it's how would I say this line if I were him. Now that sounds like a nice distinction, but it's quite a big gap in ways I find it really hard to explain, really. It's a slightly uncanny thing. And the same with Kate. What would I do if I were Kate? Well, that's impossible. There is no Kate. What would I do if I'd had Kate's experiences, or if I, it's not what would Kate do, it's what would I do.
Yeah.
But you sort of have to ventriloquize and sort of think yourself and feel yourself into those characters with their history and with their. It really helps once you get them talking. I mean, dialogue is bound to be my comfort zone, because I come to this from a script writing background, so I'm never happier than when I've got characters talking to each other, whether it's having a witty conversation. I really like that kind of Philadelphia Story, West Wing kind of. I like witty characters being witty with each other, but also, the slower, dumber, like Charles. And I'm not ashamed to say this is a book that has kind of goodies and baddies, and Charles is one of our baddies. Being tremendously arrogant and stupid. All of the fun of that. But once they start talking, then that fills in a heck of a lot for me, and I can sometimes that's a big part of the way they grow. So with Luke, I'm certainly remembering because all the characters are versions of me, really, including Kate and including some of the more unsavory characters. I'm sort of thinking my least attractive qualities are there to be used as well. But with Luke, I'm certainly remembering a sort of exaggeration of how interested I was as a student, certainly in my first year, of being a little bit mysterious, a little bit ambiguous, and I never actually pretended to be French. I didn't go that far. But Luke's, strange affectations and lies certainly informs, that is certainly a big part of that character. And then once he's out of the spotlight, once he's not showboating with various people, when it's just one-on-one with Kate, she remembers what was good about him, that he wasn't this pillock, that actually he was this very frank-hearted young man and worth the time of day. But she's forgotten all of the annoying stuff, as you would do, because she's been thinking about the Luke that she lost, not the Luke that she first met, and there's a 28-year difference, and she did a lot of the work in getting from one to the other.
Yes, there's a lovely strapline somewhere, I can't remember where I read it. It may be from your pen saying, you can't fall in love for the first time twice, which is a great setup. And if you wanted an elevator pitch, that's a good one. You mentioned you're happy with dialogue, and the dialogue, as I said, it really lifts off the page. Can you talk us through, I'm very interested to hear you explain the difference in experience of being a novelist, which is largely a solitary endeavour, pulling your hair out, forcing words onto a page in isolation, compared to what I imagine is the more collaborative experience that you had that got you the Bafta and all the other awards with the Mitchell Webb Show and the TV stuff. Was it a relief to have time on your own to say what you wanted to say and not have to compromise, or did it not work like that?
It's a huge difference, and with working as an actor, and indeed, as a scriptwriter on a sketch show, which you're also in, is of course you're surrounded by people, and you go to the set, and sort of forced sociability is part of the job. It's your job to be. Everyone's really nice to you, and you're really nice to everyone else, and it's a very support, because what you're doing is sometimes quite difficult. You might be the first thing in the morning, you might be pretending to be in love with someone, or in buckets of tears, or making love, or God knows what you're doing. And that's why actors call each other darling all the time, because they really rely on each other in these quite intense situations. So it's entirely collaborative and entirely social. And certainly as a scriptwriter, almost everything I was writing was with David. In the last few series, we were writing on our own a bit more, or in different partnerships with other writers. But the vast majority of the Mitchell and Webb corpus, if you like, was written me and David side by side at his computer. And because we were spending so much time together, we never fell out, but for two people who were not in love, this was a very, very intensive relationship. And so the clock was always ticking. You didn't really want to spend any longer in that room writing than you really had to. So we became very efficient. So when you come to writing, when I came to write How Not to Be a Boy, for example, which was my first sort of long thing, it was an enormous relief and release and liberty to be able to sit there and go, if I want to spend half an hour thinking about where this comma goes, I can. And no one's going to be drumming their finger. He wouldn't drum his fingers, but I wouldn't have the David Mitchell mental fingers drumming in my head. So that was terrific. It makes me pretty slow. Maybe I'm luxuriating I'm still wallowing in this newfound luxury of how long I get to spend on things, but maybe I'll speed up as time goes along. So there's that. But of course, the flip side of that is it's entirely your responsibility. You've got usually when you're making a TV show, you've got a lot of talented people there, actors and writers and all the crew and with all their specialities, even the director, although it's never been fully explained what they do. But everybody bringing their A game, and if it doesn't do so well, okay, well, it's a shared disaster, and if it's a hit, then it's a shared hit, and that's great. But if nobody reads Come Again, I can only blame the publisher, which I will do, obviously. But of course it's all on me. But of course I get help from the wonderful and excellent Francis Bickmore, who was my editor. He also edited Time to Be a Boy. So there's that relationship is worth talking about. But apart from that, it's really just you and a flashing cursor.
Well, I have to say, I mean, for a debut novelist, you've really lucked out in not only your publisher, the wonderful Canongate, Francis, who is one of the preeminent editors of our time in the UK, and of course your publicist Anna Frame, who really knows her onions. Yeah. Quick question, Robert. You've said about, I mean, obviously, if you're sitting with David Mitchell and you're writing stuff for the Mitchell and Webb the canon, as you call it, you have an instant first reader there with your writing partner. Who was your first reader for this?
Francis. Really, nobody sees it until he does, and in fact, not many people see it. Not many people see it afterwards before it's published either.
Well, we're hoping to change that.
My wife Abby will have a look, but this time there was a weird kind of maybe this is too much information. But there was a weird kind of conversation going on where I hadn't quite asked her to read it, and she was saying, "Are you asking?" And I would say, "I'm not." All right, don't do me any favors. And then so she ends up not really. I don't think she's actually finished it anyway. But she had a look at the first draft. I mean, it was quite a long process. It was on and off, with more off than on 2 years. So. That first draft in particular really took a while. The book is late. I mean, it was supposed to be out some time ago, but it wasn't. It wasn't ready. I just couldn't do it at the time I was supposed to do it. So it took as long as it had to take. What was the question, Francis?
There wasn't. The question was, who's your first reader?
Early reader. Me. I'm the only reader.
Interestingly, I did a thing. Jeffrey Archer, fantastic novelist, great storyteller. I was talking to him recently, and he was saying he writes 11 drafts before he ever lets anybody read it. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't believe him. But then his agent, who is the chairman of Curtis Brown, said, no, actually, Jeffrey writes 11 drafts longhand before he lets anybody see it. And I'm wondering if, given that you work with Francis Bicknell, who is obviously who's your editor at Canongate, how many drafts did this take? Because it's, as I said earlier on, it's very nicely crafted. And that doesn't happen by accident.
It's 3. But I would say, and Francis tells me, that my first drafts are a little bit more finished than the first drafts of most others that he works with. I don't mind. It's a terrible thing about pride that I think it's probably the performing side in me that I just don't want anybody to see the rehearsal. But
right. Yeah.
And I had to work quite hard to get it into my head. Francis is the director. Francis is in the rehearsal room. He's in the room. He's in the room. He's in the room. So he's not the person you need to impress. But I do want to impress him. And he said quite rightly, and I remembered this from when we did How Not to Be a Boy. I only get one chance to read it for the first time, which is very similar actually to the theme of Come Again, which is you can't fake innocence. So when he reads it for the first time, I want it to be as close as possible I want it to be the best possible first draft, even though I know that the first draft is bound to be wonky in places and flabby and have bits that are going to have to go, and that the style won't be quite what I want it to be. And that's the heartbreaking bit, because the joy of writing prose, as far as for me, is the nitty gritty of making those sentences go click and to get something for the reader in almost every sentence that it's doing something. It's not just being charming, and it's not just trying to, move things along. That there's a joy there, and that's really down to syntax. I mean, it's really down to which words go in what order, and the macro stuff, all the stuff about the plot and what it's doing. That's hard work. Whereas the smaller it gets, the more fun I'm having. So I always want to, get to a version of that before I show it to anybody, even Frances. So that's why it's really only 3 goes, because the first go will have, there'll have been, every sentence will have been gone over 20 or 30 times before anybody sees it.
That's impressive work, Craig. As you're talking about readers, would you mind very much giving us a reading from this wonderful novel of yours?
I'd be delighted.
Thank you so much, Robert.
Okay, so we don't have to do too much contextualizing. I'll just go straight from the very, very beginning.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Webb reading from his new novel entitled Come Again, published by Canongate.
Before I begin, I just want to say this is a very, very sad beginning to what is mainly an entertaining and enjoyable book. So if you find yourself being put off, don't be, because it cheers the hell up after this. But we have to start at the lowest ebb. Here we are, chapter 1. She woke with her mouth forming a single word, you. This was how they always ended, her dreams of Luke. The details varied, but they would always be alone together in his room back in college. 2 people still in their teens, asking their first questions, sharing their first jokes. Kate noticed the freckle on her knee showing through his ripped jeans, his ready smile, the way he tilted his head when he'd listened. The 28-year conversation was a few hours old, the first night of their first week. This was the beginning. She sat in a little armchair in the corner of his student room, Kurt Cobain watching her with an intelligent smirk from the Nirvana poster on the wall opposite. Below Kurt, sitting on his bed and leaning against the wall, was Luke, similarly slim but darker, unbleached, and with a face that had seen less trouble. He was jiggling his foot off the edge of the bed. Kate had just given him something to jiggle about. I mean, I wouldn't have to take all my clothes off, right? Kate adjusted the A4 pad on her lap and carried on sharpening her pencil. No, of course not. Just slip your shirt off if you like. The trouble is, I'm not good enough to draw clothes. That pajama top would present quite a challenge. She looked up from the pencil and met his mock insulted gaze. It's not a pajama top, he said, slightly pouting. It's a granddad shirt. Ah, yes, of course. Kate smiled. The blue and grey stripy cotton thing with 4 open buttons at the top that definitely doesn't look like you're wearing pajamas. Luke pinched the top of his shirt to one side and frowned at it. Yes, it's possible, he nodded like a barrister. It's possible that there's a resemblance with... Abruptly, he glanced up at her. Hang on, where did you get that pencil sharpener from? This is my room, isn't it? Kate stopped turning the pencil and took a breath. No, not yet. Let's not wake up yet. The intrusion of logic threatened to end the dream too soon. She felt the beginning of a rise towards consciousness, but resisted it by talking. She wanted to stay right here, in this room, in this moment. She wanted to stay here forever. Oh, it's my pencil sharpener. I carry it around everywhere in case I run into a boy I want to seduce. Luke stopped jiggling his foot. I'm being seduced, am I? Certainly. Why did you think I told you to strip? You don't think I can actually draw, do you? Luke looked around his room with a mixture of surprise and excitement. To be honest, yes, I did think you would at least make a token effort. Kate put the drawing materials to one side and moved over to sit beside him on the bed. And what was going to happen after I'd made a token effort? She ran her hand slowly over the shoulder of his shirt, her fingers tracing the V shape of the top buttons down to where they met a sprinkling of chest hair. She knew this body like no other. 19-year-old Luke, Luke in his 20s, Luke in his 30s, and then halfway through his 40s. He gave her the quizzical smile that always signaled the end of the dream. He said, "What's the matter?" She searched his face helplessly. "You died." He took her hand and gently said, "I know, my love, I know. But you have to wake up." "Can't. Don't want to." "Can't. You can, sweetheart. Rise. Go to the doctor. You're still young. The tumour's tiny now. They can take it out. You can..." "Kate, my love," he said. "It's too late." Luke looked down at their hands. She followed his gaze, down to their wedding rings and then back up into the eyes of her middle-aged husband. He said, "You're going to be all right, Kate. Come on, you know things. You're the girl from the future." She gently took her hand away and whispered, "I'm not going to be anything like all right. Get some help." "No," she said with certainty. "No one can help me. And I've had enough of the future."
Bravo. Robert Webb reading from his fantastic debut novel, Come Again. If you need any further incentive to read it, you don't. Just hit the buy button beneath this very screen and pre-order, and we'll get it. Someone will find a way to get it sent to you. It made me cry when I was reading it, Robert. Did it make you cry while you were writing it?
It's such a long time ago now. I think I did. Yeah, the bit where he transforms into, she looks down and he's wearing a wedding ring, and she looks up and it's the man she lost. Yes, yeah, I think it probably did. I don't know if that's what it is. Somehow it feels to me that's more off-putting than someone laughing at their own jokes, someone crying at their own sad bits. But yes, I think I probably did. Yeah.
I don't know. I think the general rule is with novelists is that if you're writing a thriller, if you don't know what happens next as you're writing it, then the audience probably won't either. And if it's not funny to you when you're writing, well, actually, here's me. I should be asking you: did you figure out funny by being funny with you and David? How does funny work when you were writing funny?
How does you write the thing? I don't know. A funny thing will occur to you, and then you start to write it down, and then you're trying to improve it. It's just kind of like any bit of writing, really. It's just the way that I communicate. Although obviously I'm giving myself the evening off today, but it just seems like the obvious way to say something usually.
You have a huge following. You don't win a Bafta and not get a huge following. You don't win a Sony award and not get a huge following. Was your potential audience on your shoulders as you wrote this, or were you just literally writing for yourself, getting the story out?
It's hard to explain. It is. It's definitely. I write to please myself. Definitely. I can't, because you can't second guess anyone else. So if I'm not, as you say, if I'm not laughing or at the funny bits, crying at the sad bits, then I can't begin to expect anybody else to. I mean, I've never been able to cynically, write a joke that I think other people will find funny. It's all got to be kissing on the lips. It's all got to be meant. Sort of vulgar way of putting it, but you know what I mean. But at the same time, of course, you have an idea of the readership. You know that there are certain things. For example, as an actor, we do a lot of swearing. I mean, when we talk to each other, there are expletives just littered all over the place. But I do understand that most people are not like that, and that they hear the F word and the C word in a completely different, not in a completely different way, but to them there's a flinch that happens that just doesn't happen when I'm talking to, mates from the business. So one is, of course, is aware of that, and I don't swear as much as I would like to, even though I read reviews that say that it's unusually sweary. This is me being clean. So of course, you're aware of certain cultural differences between you and most people, but there again, I feel that what I like is usually something that a lot of people will like, and that's half the because I'm not in it to amuse 6 people. I do want to reach out. I do want to touch as many people as possible. I've never wanted to write anything that is considered accomplished, but not many people are going to read this. I want it to be accomplished and everyone's going to read it.
Fingers crossed for that.
Yeah.
Apropos of which, how's the second album coming along?
This is the second album, and it was this is fine. I don't have an idea in my head. I mean, every day I think of things that I have ideas for jokes or characters or observations or things that I would like to see in the second novel, but I don't have an there is an inkling of a half a thought, yes, but I don't know. I'm gonna just let it do its thing for a while before I start chasing it. I've been fairly busy, so
I can hear, as you say those words, I can imagine the thoughts of thousands of novelists up and down the land saying, "You're about to have a runaway success. You're about to have an absolute hit, and your publisher is going to come banging on the door when you've sold 500,000 copies, saying, 'You have got book number 2 ready, haven't you, Robert?'"
I really haven't, no.
Better get writing. To all your many fans who hopefully will be watching this, do you have any words of comfort or encouragement for those of us who are getting a little tired and jaded with lockdown?
I think everyone's doing their best, aren't they? We're all a bit, we're all a bit strung out and knackered, and it just feels like it's. You feel like a 6-year-old who's just learned to ride a bike, and you're doing it on a slight incline with a slight headwind, and it shouldn't be impossible, but it just feels like everything feels like an unreasonable request at the moment. Everything's sort of harder than it used to be. So we really are all in the same boat for once, and I mean, my heart goes out to. I mean, I'm lucky in lots of ways. The people I like the people I live with. That's not a given. My wife and 2 kids. The kids could be they're 8 and 10. They could be younger, and that would have been harder. They could be teenagers, and I think that would probably be harder. So they're a good age, and no, we're doing all right. I mean, some days are better than others, aren't we? My what I would say is, don't worry, it'll be over eventually, and and just treat one day at a time, I suppose. Do your best.
This is not the worst time in the world to be writing a novel, Robert.
Is it though? I think. Well, no, it's not the worst time in the world, but it's not. I mean, the kids are at home. It could be, if I want to do any serious and concentrated work, then I'm waiting for the bit where they're asleep, or I'm waiting for. Abby and I would have to basically cover for each other, and so it's not, or actually the master stroke is I bought them a Nintendo Switch, so there would be a couple of quiet hours after homeschool is finished. But no, it's at the moment I can just about keep up with admin and do little bits of writing to promote the book, and otherwise I don't think I'm not really settling down to anything big at the moment.
You just revealed yourself to be a very generous and thoughtful father by buying them a Nintendo Switch rather than buying yourself a shed.
Well, if I didn't have my snazzy virtual background, you would see that this is my shed, and it's, I'm lucky to have one.
You're lucky to have a shed. Robert, it's been such a pleasure. Very, very good luck with this book, which I have to say is an absolute tour de force. I have been a huge fan of Audrey Niffenegger since she first published The Time Traveller's Wife, and I could see resonances of that. I know and love David Nichols' writing and work, and I can see resonances there. I think you do have a soar-away success on your hands. I certainly hope so. And I hope to God you find an idea quite soon and get writing, because I'm dying to read the next book that comes from your brain. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Lockdown LitFest.
That's extremely kind, Paul. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Where our guest today, of course, has been Robert Webb and his fantastic novel, Come Again. There is a buy book at the bottom of this screen. Can we commend you to it? It is an extraordinary piece of work. And if you're looking for a fresh original voice and a really, really fantastic group of characters strung together with the most wonderfully crafted narrative to keep you occupied and distanced from yourself during this lockdown period, this is the book for you. As ever, we hope you're keeping safe. We hope you're being careful. And we wish you all a very lovely week. Cheerio.